Well, I'm here today ready to welcome back our guest, Adam Kopic, who is our longtime friend and pastor, along with Alex. Good to see you guys today, and excited to continue our conversation. We are in season 13, and we've titled it Good Together, which I love that you guys gave it that title. God's redemptive story in marriage, because a lot of times when we think about marriage, we don't necessarily think about what being good together or what is good together. Because we're going to be talking about creation today, and that's really the emphasis, that marriage is good. And so often, as we are going to talk about, that is not our starting point or even where our focal point is. And so, being an exhorter myself in gifting, I really like this idea of focusing on the goodness of marriage. So we kind of had a little bit of a challenge before we came on to say, hey, what can you name that's good or beautiful or right in your marriage? And so, Alex, you immediately said you came up with something, so I'm going to let you jump in and share.
Easy. If you know my husband, you already know what I'm going to say. But I think I was convicted because last time I told the story of I will never teach marriage again. And I'm such a pro-marriage person. I always say, like, my marriage is really my most favorite thing about my life. And it's mainly because my husband is fun and funny and likes to play, and those are all things that I am not. I'm not fun, I'm not funny, and I'm not good at play. So he brings all that to me, and it has saved us in so many difficult seasons. It has saved us in chronic pain and all different struggles that we've had. So yeah, that's a easy one for me to name.
That's good. I think you're fun and funny. You just don't mean to be funny.
I like to laugh, which is different than being funny.
You're right about that. And that's good for somebody who is funny.
I'm an appreciator.
Yes, you can appreciate that. Very good. What about you, Adam, and your sweet wife, Stephanie? In fact, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit just about your family, your children, and all the how long you've been married? Just a little bio.
Yeah, so I mentioned last time, Steph and I have been married for 18, we'll be 19 this November. I mean, it's 7 months out, but it's presumptuous. But 19 this year.
You can do it.
Yeah. That's why we do this podcast. But really, we met in college through campus outreach. She was in Louisiana, southeastern Louisiana. I was at Troy. We met through one of those beach projects through college ministry, and really dated through college, dated long distance. Really one of those defining questions for me was, what am I more about the kingdom of God with or without this person? And that was a no-brainer with Stephanie. And so we joke that we have married our twin. People always talk about like marrying, opposites. We married our twin, which means we have a lot of fun, and then we both struggle to do the dishes. And so, like, there's this, as I think about, like, what joy it is that, or what's beautiful in marriage, it is this one anothering through life together, that you really do have this best friend that's you're working, through hard things together. You see the beauty of redemption through tougher seasons. We have 3 kids, so 11, 13, and 15 right now. I was trying to think of that. And so it's just real humbling to think, having almost a driver and another teenager, about to have another soon. And just the beauty of raising kids together. We see our personalities, good and bad, coming out in them. But it is just the beauty of journeying together and celebrating one another, and that's been what's been beautiful, is to see the gifting of the Lord in each of us. And so for y'all know this, but my wife is a Cajun from Louisiana. She's got a lot of this Cajun culture, but then she just has such a gift of music and how she uses that in the church and community theater, in schools, in just different ways. And so one of the things I just love about our marriage is getting to experience the goodness of God through her display of love of music, and then to see that now happen in our kids. And so a little snapshot of us.
I mean, I think we could just have a whole podcast just on the goodness of God in our marriage. It'd be just so edifying to us and our spouses. I love so much of what you said, and now I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to share that. Oh, maybe I should share that. Maybe I should go there. But I'll stick with my original. And Paul and I married as exact opposites. All I want to do is play, and all he wants to do is work, do the dishes, and task. He's task-oriented. I'm people-oriented. I would say we both like fun, but we just find our fun in very different ways. But I think that has part of the beauty and goodness of my marriage is that we are not clones. We are not alike. There's no expectation of that. And particularly as we've entered the empty nest years, which have just been really delightful. Loved raising my family, but empty nesting has been really so much fun. And one of the things I think we've done really well is to encourage one another in our hobbies, our pursuits, our interest. And so Paul is all about sports and sports writing and attending sports events. He just got back from Scotland where he got to play the old course and tour the Royal and Ancient. And I could be so excited for him and enter into that and look at all the pictures and hear all the stories and be so excited. And, you know, for me on the other side, I just like getting on the water and paddleboarding or hiking or a lot of times doing things outdoorsy. So, which he likes a little bit, but not as much. But he's always encouraging me to go and really wants to hear about it when I get back. And of course, even the podcast and things like that are part of just him cheering me on and really wanting me to excel in the areas that God has gifted me. And so I just see that beauty of the individuals, but also coming together because we've spent most of our really married life doing a lot as a team, raising a family, building careers, and all of those things. And now I feel like we're getting to enjoy the fruit of that labor in a lot of ways, but also getting to enjoy more of who we are as individuals. So super sweet. Well, we want to go back to this idea of the grand narrative or God's big story. And where we see marriage, not just in those key marriage verses, as we've been calling them, but throughout the story. And so one of the ways we talk about this, Adam, is pulling the thread of marriage through the Bible or through the big story of the Bible. And so to jump off our time today, could you just pull that thread for us? And then we're going to come back and zero in and focus on just creation for today. But let's put creation in the context of the story before we get started.
Yeah, if we're thinking of that big progressive plan of God's redemption in Jesus Christ, you know, we start with prologue. We start with before there was a God. So even before creation, there's this loving, wise, eternal God who has authority and sovereignty. And as we're thinking of specifically the realm of marriage, like it is not a social construct. It is a design of a good designer, of a good God. Mm-hmm. So we go from the prologue to creation. In creation, we see how this good God has designed marriage for our good, both as individuals and as this communal experience, as this one anothering and oneness that actually mirrors the oneness we experience in relationship with our Creator God. In the fall, as we move to the bad news of the story, we see how marriage gets distorted as God's design for us is now used to consume and destroy what he created instead of seeking the flourishing and the blessing. And even as we began our time about appreciating the goodness, there is, sin and suffering's distortion of a marriage now in many ways blinds us from God's good design. The hope of the scriptures is in redemption. We'll see how Jesus is the hope for mankind, for our salvation, and for our marriages, and for how his work on the cross brings healing in marriages. It brings the capacity to forgive, the capacity to repair ruptures, and really for all of our relationships, not just in marriage. And then the last chapter of restoration is our forward-looking view of Christ's return again. That even though no marriage is heaven, even as much as you may have just rose-colored glasses for your spouse, that the story of restoration for the believer says our best days are always ahead of us. And that's hope for those who think marriage couldn't possibly get better. And that's hope for those that marriages feel really hard today, is that restoration shows us God is working in ultimate good. And one day the hope is even the fullness of new creation coming as Christ comes again.
That was a great recap. Thank you. Well, today we want to focus on creation, and we're saying in creation, marriage is good. And one of the things, as you were both speaking of your husbands, you can't help but be pointing back to the goodness of God, because you can.
To be fair, I didn't speak of my husband.
I mean, your wife, and your husband.
I felt a need to really put a roadblock there. We needed to. I really felt like a red flag.
As I'm looking right at Alex and totally missing you in my frame, hilarious. As you spoke of your spouses.
Very good, very good, very good.
I couldn't help but just, there's something about talking about the goodness in somebody else that then points us upward toward the goodness of God, because we know that good comes from God. And so, Adam, let's just talk about, what do we mean when we say marriage is good?
Yeah, one of the things we said in that first podcast was just this reality that sometimes right now people are questioning, is marriage even worth it? Is it good? Because it's at times costly, or we're trying to work through conflict and it feels like we're stuck. And so really, as we consider creation, what we're considering is not, is my experience today in the momentary circumstance good in itself? What is God's design? And marriage in its design is good. And it's good for us. Like God, even as he describes, his creation, he is delighting in his creation. We'll talk about this in a moment, but there's this almost like an artist looking at his painting one stroke at a time, like, this is really good. And marriage is given that. And I think we live in a culture sometimes that doesn't speak that kind of delight and that cherishing of the institution of marriage and the experience of marriage. And so what we're really talking about is that it's good in the sense that it is life-giving. It's meant for our flourishing, both as individuals and, again, as a couple, not only in prayerfully, capacity for children or future generations, or just the experience of being together with someone, but there is this flourishing that we are meant for, in a sense, that one place we experience it is in marriage.
Mm-hmm. I love that you differentiated between the institution and the experience. I think that's really helpful as well. Well, I know when I first got married, I was in a church. I feel like that a lot of the emphasis, just generally, the gospel and just the message of the Bible started with the fall. So on a personal level, I was always coming back to what a terrible person I was, or what a worm I am, or those sort of things. And so when I got married, I think it was just really easy to notice all that was wrong with my marriage pretty quickly, as opposed to really looking for the goodness in the experience and looking for the goodness in the institution. And so, Alex, I know this is something that we've talked about before, of why it's so important to start with the creation and not the fall.
Mm-hmm. I think you're echoing a lot of people's experience who've grown up in the churches, feeling like we start with, we're sinners, and we want to start first with that we're image bearers. We're made in the image of the triune God, and because of that, we're made to experience relationship and community and delight and just the glory of who God is in each other. And then we also want to start with creation, to know that we have these longings because of the way God designed us, and that these longings are for good things. And yes, they do get twisted in the fall, but there is an origin story here where we know that God put these longings in us. And when we don't have these longings, and when those longings aren't met, they become warning lights for us that something's wrong in the way that we're living out our image bearing. And we want to remember that we were designed as good. God called us good, and God designed our spouses as good, so that we can take delight in one another. So I think we talked last time about not having this negative outlook on who we are as people and who our spouse is as people. The Gottmans call that this negative sentiment, where we begin to frame every story just really ungenerously, just telling ourselves a negative or unkind story about the other person. And we want to remember that God created us as good, and so we can always look for and always find something good in our spouse.
Well, I think that's really good and can be really hard. And we'll talk about why that's hard the next session, the next episode. But we're going to stay with the goodness in creation for this one. Well, you talk about the pattern of creation and that being important as we approach the idea of marriage.
Yeah, so what we see in Genesis is, I think, just so interesting in the way that the narrative goes. We see, of course, that from the beginning, in the beginning, that God spoke, and the world came into existence. And so we see this pattern in Genesis 1 of God said, and there was, And God saw that it was good. And then evening and morning and the first day, evening and morning the second day, we see this order and structure and design and this refrain of goodness in the creation, that God is pleased with it. And then we also see that there is a pause in the creation story, that God pauses and he rests on the seventh day. And I think we want to highlight these because they have implications about who we are.
Okay. I'm just thinking about moving on from here. Adam, we see that there is a rhythm, but then there's an interruption or a change in the rhythm that happens when we come to creation of humans, of men and women.
Yeah, I mean, as we get kind of towards the end of that section, there has been in some ways this creation of the arenas, the skies and the seas and the land, and then the creation of the inhabitants of those arenas. And so you see all these parallels, but something happens when it gets to God creating man. And, I'll read this just briefly. It says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them, and God blessed them. And God said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning the sixth day. As Alex just pointed out, there was this refrain of it's good, it's good, it's good. But when it gets to man, this creation of male and female, it was very good. There is something that is especially good. And we see it in that text of we are made unlike anything else in creation in the image of our triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, in the image of this relational God. And like I said, I just love it because you almost said it a moment ago, it's hard for us to stay in the goodness, in considering the goodness, because we're so prone to run ahead and look at what's bad or what's hard, and it's hard for us to embrace that. And what the creation account really does is it shows us this uniqueness of being made in the image of God. And so a couple things I think is really helpful for us to think about in light of that is, one is this image bearing of man and female, or of male and female, that this privilege we get, unlike anything else in creation, to bear God's image, to mirror him, to show reflection of him to each other and to all of creation. It's this beautiful way that we get to represent him in the world. And so there is this truth that no matter how the person across from you has let you down today, they bear something of the goodness of God today. And if I would venture to say, if we started there, a lot of our conflict would even shake out differently if we could really hold the tension of what of the goodness of God is in front of me in this person. Two, I think in this creation of male and female, and even of this, what we see in Genesis 2, this creating Eve from Adam, and then, presenting Eve. We see that the mystery of marriage is two people made in the image of God coming together in a one flesh relationship. And the uniqueness of this is this idea of this language of being one flesh, yet two individuals. And I'll probably say this through the whole podcast is we have another tension here to wrestle with of being individuals, yet a collective. Individuals, yet union together. And so it's just this beautiful mystery that God has created in marriage. And in that, Alex will talk about this, but this idea that we have agency, purpose, belonging, rest, these aspects of our image bearing, very particular elements of our image bearing. And he says that he created us without the experience of shame. And here's a place that I always pause, because I can't even get my mind around that. It's hard for me to really lean into so experiencing another person in all of their goodness, but also fully embracing the goodness God has created in me that I'm able to offer to them, and not in any way wonder, am I enough? Or am I too much for this person? That the image of the scripture says that God made us naked and unashamed. This image of closeness, of intimacy, of nothing mediating, like nothing between us. And it's just so beautiful for us to sit there and to wait, in a sense, until we get it. And then there's just this aspect that in marriage, we get to mirror the relationship of God to his people. That as we pull that thread through Scripture, marriage is this image of that oneness, of that intimacy, that God isn't just saying for you to experience laterally, but that you are meant to experience vertically, like with your Creator God. And so he gives us the intimacy, even that image of sex, as this like such a closeness where you almost can't tell where one ends and the other begins. That is what we are supposed to experience in our union in Christ. And that is the glory and the beauty that's on display in what marriage is.
Wow, I love that explanation, Adam. I feel like that really highlighted the goodness of marriage and makes you want to look at the goodness of your marriage, and hopefully will make somebody want to be married if they are thinking about it. So I think that's just really beautiful, and I think so much of that is missed in our churches and just in our culture today. So we've been talking about the grand narrative, or God's big story, and we said that there are these 5 eras with prologue all the way to redemption, and now we're kind of coming down in the creation part today. And we're specifically in creation, even looking at what it means to be an image bearer and how that is going to impact our ability to relate to one another in a good way in God's design. And so, Alex, you have talked about just this idea of kind of zooming in and zooming out. Explain a little bit of what that looks like, and then take us through these characteristics. Adam briefly mentioned them, but these 4 characteristics that we talk about that make up our image bearing. And let's go from there.
Yeah, I think you did a good job of explaining the zooming out, where we see God's big story and we pull the thread of marriage through that story. And now we want to come in and look at what it means for 2 image bearers to reflect and represent God in the world. And the 4 characteristics are agency, purpose, belonging, and rest. And I just wanted to define them quickly, and then we'll talk about how they play out specifically in marriage. But agency is just a word we don't use very much, but it's just the ability to make choices like the God who made us. Adam and Eve were created, and immediately God placed them in a context of the garden, and he gave them a choice. May not see it, the language like that, but when he set up that you should not eat of this tree, you can eat of these trees, there's choice right there in front of them, because they were going to be active and not passive participants in their lives. He gave them the ability to make choices and determine the direction of their lives. And then we see that they had purpose, this idea of glorifying God, our purpose. We're here to glorify God and enjoy him. But then he specifically asked Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. He gave them a purpose as individuals and then as a couple to fulfill that purpose. And then he gave them a sense of belonging. So we see that here we have this God, and in the pattern, like we talked about, of the creation narrative, it's God said, God said, God said, until we come to Adam and Eve. And then it says, God said, let us make man in our image. And we see this communal God, this triune God, making communal beings. And then later he even adds more to that by saying it's not good for man to be alone. That man needed to be in relationship with somebody like him, is what Adam said about Eve. And then finally, we were made for rest. And I put rest and beauty together, that God put Adam and Eve in this beautiful garden, and that beauty brought rest to their bodies and their souls. But then God also modeled rest for Adam and Eve. Right from the beginning, we see the pattern of the creation being evening and morning, that God showed us that we rest first and that our work flows out of that rest. And then also he rested on the sixth day. And on the seventh day, he rested, showing us, I don't think God needed a break. I think he was modeling something very important for us, letting us know we were made finite, limited beings that were going to need rest and beauty to restore us.
I think, let's talk now, Alex, about how these characteristics play into our marriage. And I just want to just repeat them again. There's agency, purpose, belonging, and rest and beauty. We're putting rest and beauty together. So if these are new concepts for anyone, you might want to stop or just rewind. Listen to what Alex said one more time, because it's going to be real important to understand, like, this is kind of the crux of the rest of the teaching as we're going through the grand narrative, but really coming back to what it means to be created in the image of God, because it is so central to what a good marriage is going to be in terms of the individuals that come into the marriage and then being a married couple. So go through, both of you, if you will, just begin to go through, and let's just really slowly break this down and connect the dots with marriage and give some examples that will help people see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, and I did want to just say, like, we've talked about this. There's probably other things we could have said in some ways, even broken some of these up even more. But these are really four really good main buckets to kind of think of putting a lot of categories of our making to understand how is it that we're created, how has sin affected it, how is Christ redeeming it. So, as we start with that first one of agency, it's really, like Alex said, it's just simply the ability to make decisions or make choices and to act independently. Like, we do things. We are made to actually have agency and the capacity to affect other things, to make choices, and even in many ways discernments about things, like to choose between things. And so, a question it makes us perhaps ask is, what is mine to do? As one of the things Alex said is created with limits. A basic question of our marriages is what is mine to do? And what are the limits that I can even operate in? And so that agency is our capacity to actually make choices and to operate in like that. It's learning to make choices. It's we bring our thinking, our desires, our convictions into our shared decisions. Both parties have a voice. Like, that's what's really important too as we think about agency. It's not just my agency, it's Stephanie's agency, it's our spouse's agency. Yeah. And so what does it mean to really appreciate the voice of the other? To really learn to see what goodness of God comes forward in the decisions and the capacity to do good work in marriage. And it's one of the tensions is, how do we merge lives in the daily doing? And that comes, I gave the silly example of, like, we both love the same things, me and my wife, but we also struggle at the same things as well. But there is a sense where we merge our lives. And so what does it mean to do things together, not solely independent, but also to have shared meaning and purpose together as we make choices? And that's what Alex will go into. And it also helps us just recognize, as individuals, we are not made simply to complete each other. We actually are complete as image bearers in God. And that's like a weird story of our culture, or a different kind of narrative for us to live by, is like, you complete me. Okay, that's a sweet movie sentiment, but that is not true, because we are made to be one in Christ, and there is this beauty that we get to be one in Christ together. But I never stop being Adam. I don't get absorbed into Stephanie, or I ought not to. And that's so right. So there's an element that we get to celebrate, that the uniqueness of each other's choices and decisions to do things, and even interest in that regard. But there's also this idea, specifically as we get to the making of Eve, of what does it mean that Eve complements Adam? What does it mean that she is made in such a way to not get absorbed into Adam, nor Adam into her, yet there's a way that they actually both bring something to each other that is for the mutual benefit because each have separate agency, yet for the good of the other.
Adam, all the teaching that you did at the church, I heard you talk about this idea of, again, how a woman is to complement the husband. And I think when we talk about agency and making choices, it's one of the places that we will talk more about the fall, but it's one of the places that we can really get confused about what that means in marriage, particularly with one person ruling over the other. And I think particularly when we look at some of the teachings of Paul, that specifically have to do with a husband's leadership or a woman's submission. So not to get into the fall part of it yet, but how do you see that as God's design? Like, what are we talking about that a woman's the helper, and what does that mean? Because that doesn't sound like she has choice. It sounds like she just needs to do what he chooses.
Yeah. So this is probably a part of when we teach this together that me and Alex like fight over who gets to teach this part, because we both just like, it's such like a,
speak to it.
yeah, I mean, and really Alex does such a beautiful job with it, but it's just so beautiful to look at Eve's making. And a couple just things to note is, one is she is made of Adam. Like, there is something that is really particularly beautiful that they share such core design, yet are uniquely different. And when God says it's not good for Adam to be alone, like, there's this element that God created Adam with a defect. He created all of humanity with a defect. It wasn't like God was like, oh man, what part did I leave out? No, like, God actually designed us with somewhat of a deficiency, of a need for the other. And actually, as we talk about belonging, that's where that shows up too. But in Eve's making, he says, let us make a helper fit for him. And that language there in the Hebrew is Ezer Kenegdo, which I'm, from small town Alabama, so my Hebrew has a twang to it. But that Ezer Kenegdo is this beautiful expression that is only used of Eve and of God himself in the scriptures. And when it speaks of God as a Ezer Kenegdo, it is a helper who contends for and against and fights for. It gives the image of one who is for the good of the other and who is even willing to battle for the other. And I always forget where I heard this. Again, I'm a pool of other people's expressions, so nothing's original with me. But like the language of Ezer Kenegdo and that idea of pushing against, and it's probably from you, Alex. So here we go. I'll just straight rip it off of you. But like, is just this image of like almost like a roof truss, like of two braces against the other that they push against to support the other. That Ezer Kenegdo is this image of contends with or pushes against for the good of the other. Now, culturally, let's not jump ahead to the fall too much, but there is this like misalignment language of that text, like Adam is above Eve in this regard, but there is this, instead of like a leveraging one over the other, it is a uniqueness of design and of agency that is for the good of each other. So I don't know if you want to jump on any of that, Alex.
Yeah, Alex, what do you want to add to that?
Just today I had a conversation with a married couple, and one of the questions, that we were posing was, could the wife in this case help her husband feel like she was on his team? And she said, how can I do that when there's some destructive behaviors happening? And I was like, fantastic question, because I think if you're going to be a good teammate, if you're going to be a good helper teammate, you are going to contend for, you're going to delight in what is good, but you're also going to contend against what is destructive. So I'm not asking you to turn a blind eye or, pat him on the head and say, oh, that's okay, you're, dirty little sinner. I mean, like, that's not the point of just like, we're not excusing or overlooking things in the other person's life that would be destructive. We want to encourage them to live out God's good design as image bearers in a way that they can flourish. And so that often means having to push back and remind somebody of the ways that they are not doing that.
Mm-hmm. That's a teaching I didn't get when I first got married, and that would have been really, really helpful to hasten the sanctification of my husband and for me. Because in our boundaries, we talked about being, doormats and being, what do we call them? Doormats and
Fortresses.
thank you, fortresses, right? Where I'm the doormat and Paul's the fortress. But that would have been a great teaching for me to have really understood, instead of the way that I understood it, that actually I didn't have agency, or that my agency wasn't really good, that my decisions weren't going to be as good as his decisions. And that wasn't something Paul imposed on me. That was actually something, a message that I got from some of the teaching that I was involved with from the church.
Yeah.
Oddly enough.
Yeah.
So, Alex, the next point of image bearing or characteristic that we want to talk about is purpose in marriage. How does this play out?
So we're kind of just defining purpose as the reason we exist. And we've said, the reason we exist is to glorify God, to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, tend and keep it. And what we're asking is just, how do we do that in marriage? Asking the question of, certainly, what does that mean for each one of us as individuals? What is each individual living for? But then why does the marriage exist, and how does the marriage fulfill God's purposes? Because marriage is a new family being created. And it's hard to think that when we're 20-year-olds, coming together, that we're creating a new family. But those two people make a new family, and they are created to achieve a common purpose, and yet still hold on to this individuality in their calling. I'm glad that God has not called me to do some of the things that my husband does. I am not cut out for it. And I think he's glad that he hasn't been called to do some of the things that I do. But then how do we also begin to see how those purposes come together and how that unifies us in marriage? And so how does it unify us when we think about specific areas of marriage and family, like parenting and finances and sex, and what are the priorities of the marriage going to be? So we're asking these questions, yes, as individuals, but also of the marriage and the joining of two people.
And the good answer is the answer that is going to most glorify God and allow us to enjoy Him and one another. And I think that gets missed. Like, we can sometimes be so focused on the issue, we miss the purpose. Right. And if we can zoom in and zoom out, if we can zoom out to well, what's the purpose? How do we glorify God here? How do we enjoy Him? And how are we going to enjoy one another? As we're living in this purpose, then it begins to realign, and I think we will have we'll have a less polarized, fighting back and forth kind of marriage, because there's going to be more unity there. So, all right, Adam, can you take belonging and tell us how that fits into the marriage picture?
Yeah, it's kind of this idea that we have been made to experience intimate relationship, both with God first and then with others. And so really this idea of belonging is that I have a place, I have people, I am meant for relationship. And possibly a question, that helps us understand it is, who am I safe with, or like who can I experience, I feel like this is language from someone, but who am I most human with, where I don't have to pretend to perform or to hide from another person. And we really see this in the garden. And I gave that image a moment ago where it says that Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed, meaning there was no sense of needing to hide from this other person. That's a sense of belonging, that I'm not too much nor not enough for this other person. That's your design. And with it comes a safety to live generously towards one another, because I want to give of myself because I'm safe to be with you and to be received by you. And so, really in many ways, it's also this aspect of friendship in marriage. When we talk about belonging, sometimes we almost go straight to sex and sexual intimacy, but it's, I think you say it, Alex, it's not merely a mingling of bodies, it's a mingling of souls. And so there is this beauty of, and really when I think of that theme of good together, this is one of those places it jumps out at me. It's man, I feel my most human self when I'm with you aspect of marriage.
again, as we're going through, I just, looking back so much over 35 years of my own marriage, and I wish that Paul and I had really understood the idea of friendship, because again, I think we came in with so much about roles. Who is responsible for doing what? Who's in charge? What's my role? What's your role? Maybe even some shared, meaning, understanding. We want to have a family. We want to build a family. He's got to go to work. I'm going to whatever. But I think along the way, if the friendship aspect had been emphasized to us more, it would have pulled in more scripture, because friendship isn't just about roles. It's like, what does it mean to have a role in a friendship? Like, we don't talk about friendships this way. Like, what's my role, Alex? And what's your role? And Adam, what's your role? We do play roles. Our giftings and our abilities and those sort of things may give us a certain role. When we have a lot of different friends, people have to, but you know what I'm saying? There's not like a role in a friendship. Yeah. Friendship is just a place that we come and we're safe, and that we feel known and seen and loved. And wow, to be able to start off your marriage is saying that is what we want. Like, if we shoot for that, and Tiffany Higginbotham is, one of our favorite people who we've had on the podcast. And I have to say that I've always admired her marriage with her husband, because I've always felt like they have gotten that really good. Like, there seemed to always be this sense of like leading with friendship. And that has been evident, and I think very beautiful, and I think it's something that is really going to serve her children well as they get married, to not have to back up and figure it out. So yes, the belonging, the friendship, the goodness and beauty in it of God is just a part of the rest and beauty, which Alex, you're going to go into next. It is a part of rest and beauty, but I think it's something, as we do a lot of marriage counseling, we just see that people aren't even friends. They don't even know how to be friends, and they've lost friendship.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the best apologetics for God and really for faith in Christ is marriages that show enjoyment and delight in one another. Not a fake pretense, not a pretending, but a learning to explore the other, to have kind of a hopeful anticipation of experiencing more goodness with the other, like growing friendship. And so that it is one of the greatest apologetics for us, not pretending we don't have problems, but a growing appreciation and I enjoy, because we, at the end of the day, we want to be delighted in. It's not that we just want to do that for other people. We actually want to like walk in the room and somebody say, I'm glad you're here today. And that's a beauty in marriage.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think if you've ever come to me for marriage counseling, you've heard at some point me step up on my soapbox and rail against Disney culture of this idea of like soulmates, and that is what we're talking about. This enjoyment, this friendship is instantaneous. There's one person that you experience that with. Because what we see in our own marriages and in other marriages of people that we walk with is like that has to be cultivated. That does not happen overnight. Just like any friendship is cultivated, this belonging and intimacy in marriage is cultivated. I think it's emotional, it's spiritual, it is physical, and I call it recreational. Just how do we have fun together?
Yeah.
And that this is done in small moments over time, sometimes seemingly really mundane moments over time, where we build this emotional intimacy, we build this trust in one another, and we learn how to delight in the other person. And if we come into marriage with a story that should happen naturally, we're going to be severely disappointed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Alex, walk us through the final characteristic or bucket that we are putting this idea of the idea that we are image bearers, and how rest and beauty play into the idea of marriage.
Well, one of our favorite words when we think about these concepts of like rest and beauty is shalom, and shalom is that idea not just of peace as in a lack of conflict or quietness, but of wholeness and completeness in who God made us to be. And so we want to know, how do we experience that wholeness and completeness in marriage? And some of that wholeness and completeness is recognizing that we are finite creatures, that God did not make us infinite as He is, but we need rest and beauty for our bodies and souls. And not only do we need that to feed us, but we need that. We are called to partner with God in creating that and creating shalom in the marriage relationship. And then as we face outward toward the world, how are we going to go into the world and create rest and beauty? And to recognize that rest is often experienced in beauty, and then that beauty creates spaces for rest, and they have this reciprocal relationship where the shalom builds or feeds on each other. This wholeness and completeness builds. And again, it's not just for us to experience in marriage and kind of hunker down and say, this is my shalom place, but it's also to turn outward to the world and ask, how are we going to display that and cultivate that in the cultures and in the places that God's placed us?
I'm so glad you added that last part, because we are blessed to be a blessing to others. And I love that, facing not, because I think sometimes people do get married and they turn very inward and they circle the wagon. It's just me and my spouse and it's just our family. And if we can just keep everybody else out and we can be perfect in here, and as we're going to find from the fall, because there's nobody perfect in here, then things don't go perfect in there, even if you try to do that. But I love that idea that as we are experiencing God's rest and beauty, then we begin to push that out to a world that is in so much need of rest and beauty. And that rest and beauty, like all of these attributes, then what does it point us to? It points us right to back to prologue, to the Lord, the wise and good and loving God who created the world and created the relationship, and particularly this relationship of marriage. Adam, did you want to add anything to rest and beauty? No? Okay. Well, I want to say that we have been talking about God's ideal. I don't know if people still say this about relationships, but I can remember a time, like if somebody had a really good relationship, everybody would be like, goals, 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 and it'd be like all over social media, or you do air quotes, like that's what you wanted your relationship to be like. So that's what's in my mind right now, is like this creation design of marriage is like goals, and it is God's ideal. But we are going to learn in the next episode that the fall is, coming on the heels of God's good design, and it's going to mar this good design. And thankfully, that's not the end of the story. So stick with us the whole podcast. We don't want you to please don't get stuck in the fall. That would be terrible. But I also don't want people to be discouraged about this idea of creation. And as we say that marriage is good. And so I wonder if one of you might just give a word to how to be encouraged if maybe you're not experiencing this goodness in your marriage.
Yeah, I mean,
I just threw that one at y'all.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. We sometimes think like the Genesis account, like, well, that's good, but what does that matter now that the sin is here and it's all, broken now anyway? Like, what does that matter? And, I almost think about folks who like are car collectors, and, they buy an old, Mustang, and there's almost this like beating heart for the love of the original Mustang, recognizing the years have aged it, rust has come, and there's a delight to restore to what is a good design, instead of just saying, well, it's crap anyway, let's trash it. And so I think it's helpful for us not just to think about a fantastical, I think it's helpful for us not just to think of some fantasy ideal, but of foundation and design and goodness and beauty. And so it helps us nurture appreciation. And in many ways, like a word I spent a lot of time this year thinking about, again, from someone else, prophetic imagination. It is holding out capacity for what could be. And so we don't do that simply by looking forward, but also by looking back. And in many ways, like if we think of at church, we come to communion, we come to the Lord's table. And in many ways, it's at this like, intersection of looking back to the work of Christ and looking forward to the second coming of Christ and where we are in between. And it's holding out the full work of God in the moment that we're coming to the table where we don't feel so good, where we feel broken. And so what we're talking about isn't trying to make people feel bad that they don't look like the ideal. It's actually to say what you're experiencing, like, you actually should be bothered if it doesn't feel good. Like, it's okay that there's anger, that there's sadness, that there's grief, that sometimes you feel betrayed by not just your spouse, but by the image of marriage that has been cast to you. And so all of that, when we look at creation, it helps us consider what am I supposed to even be feeling even in this moment as a human when things don't feel so good. That'd be my thought on it.
Spoken like a true pastor.
Answer it.
Yeah, it's so good.
Adam gave the pastoral answer. I'll give the practical answer.
Okay.
And he said that, with each one of these segments, we're giving tools, and we've derived a lot of the tools from the Gottmans, who are a married couple, Jewish married couple. They've been studying marriage for decades, and they build their model of marriage counseling on this idea of emotional intimacy. What does it mean to build an emotional intimacy? And again, that's done in small moments. And so the tools that we're going to give for this particular era of creation are about building a culture of flourishing in your marriage in small moments of looking for bids for connection and in moments of expressing gratitude and appreciation. And both of those are tied to our image bearing, in that there's always something to celebrate in the other person and gratitude and appreciation, and there's always a place for us to seek connection. My kids laugh at me, and I'll say this in the video on the tools. Our kids laugh at us because we are always calling each other to the window to look at the cardinal or look at the chipmunk or look at the new whatever wildlife is in our courtyard. And these are just these small moments of connection between me and Mason. Yes, our kids think we're old because of it, but it's something we enjoy together. Takes less than 30 seconds oftentimes, but there are these small places that if we don't see these things being cultivated in the big picture of our marriage, can we trust the Lord that this design is good, that these good things are in our spouse, and can we be willing to build it moment by moment to create this beautiful picture that is not done overnight. It's not done by waving the magic Disney wand. It's actually done in small moments where we intentionally cultivate appreciation and connection with each other.
Well, I know those tools and have used them in my own marriage, and you are right. The intentional, just the intentionality of looking for what's good and entering into somebody for connection. It just makes a huge difference over time. So I'm excited for our listeners to be able to hear that tool and begin to use it. Adam and Alex, I just want to thank you both. I want to thank you for just the time that you've put into thinking through marriage along the lines of the grand narrative. And already, I think, just in this episode and the last one is so rich. There's so much to consider. I know, again, some of these concepts may be new to our listeners, or may feel a little bit heady, but hopefully we're continuing to bring them down to a place that is very understandable, and I think you guys have done a really good job of that, so thank you. Next time we meet, we're going to be in episode 3, and we're going to be talking about the fall and why marriage is often not good, or why marriage is hard. And again, that's not the end of the story, so if you're going to listen to episode 3, then stay with us for 4 and 5. But it is going to explain a lot of why this good design is not always experienced to the fullest, and sometimes very difficult to find in our marriages. So I look forward to seeing you guys again when we meet for episode 3.